So it promises to be a good program.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Very good. You're awake and up. I was talking with my good friends Tom and Marcia, and they're not used to seeing me at this time in the morning. I'm a late morning person. So I'm pleased to be with you. As a bit of background information, I have been here and sometimes away member of Trinity since the mid-1990s when I moved to the Twin Cities and my brother was on staff here at Trinity. I spent a number of years on Trinity's then contemporary worship team alongside such music icons as Terry Morse, Marcia Wilcox, and Tom Lane. I always love coming back to Trinity. My purpose in being with you today is to offer my personal experience with mental illness and the impacts that illness had on those that I care about, as well as the roles each one of them had in my healing. I have spoken on mental illness for the National Alliance on Mental Illness, also called NAMI, for about 6 years through its In Our Own Voice program. And this is a program that invites people who have had experience with mental illness to tell their story and to talk about their story in 3 different parts, which I'll tell you about in a bit. I have spoken to churches, to conferences, to police in training, to psychology classes at colleges and more. I'll be sharing resources with you on mental illness, warning signs, as well as actions that you might take as co-workers, friends, and family members to those with mental illness. Of growing interest to me over the past several years is the role of faith in mental illness and in healing. It leads to questions such as, where is God? When will God be here? And why is this happening? All of the suffering questions. I will share my personal experience with faith and mental illness, and I'll also spend some time on the role the church can play as a place of solace, care, and concern for those with mental illness. This will be a lot for our time together. I'll save time for questions and for thoughts as we are in the latter half of our time together. I begin now with my story in 3 parts: what happened, what helped, and what's next, and what's new. Throughout my childhood and my early adult years, I struggled a lot with what I thought was just moodiness. And I now recognize that as depression symptoms. However, I did not become acutely ill until my late 40s. As I came to learn, childhood trauma can linger unaddressed into adulthood, and often one single precipitating event can trigger an onset of acute mental illness. This was my path. The precipitating event was my father's diagnosis with a terminal illness at his age of 68. My father and I had a very loving, but also a difficult relationship as a result of his struggle for many years with alcoholism. He recovered in his 50s, and that was the golden years of time with him. His terminal illness triggered in me a return of unaddressed childhood trauma from both the alcoholism and from sexual abuse by an extended family member. I longed for a reconciliation with my father and for his apology before he left us. Soon followed a 5-year period, including the 2 years before my father's death and the 3 years after, where I cycled between what was eventually diagnosed as post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, clinical depression, and acute anxiety. This is all a fancy way of saying that my world and I began to fall apart. I had trouble leaving my home in the mornings, had poor to no concentration EMTs for help and had long-running, terrible arguments with God. I cycled downward and was hospitalized repeatedly. On 5 separate occasions, I was so unable to cope that I spent each time 6-week stays in adult outpatient treatment programs, during which I was unable to work. I experienced suicidal thinking and an overdose, resulting in hospitalization and another 6 weeks of intensive outpatient treatment. I had feelings of shame and felt very alone, despite the fact that there were friends and family surrounding me. During this time, I had all of the God questions. God, what am I doing wrong? Where are you? Why do I have to suffer now? And why did I suffer then? What are you going to do to bring relief? And what is the purpose in all of this? I spent hours crying and wrestling with God with these questions, all the while experiencing deep emotional pain, unlike any physical pain I had felt before. If you can imagine the pain that comes with the loss of a loved one, that is a bit like the emotional pain that I felt during these 5 years as I cycled through the various diagnoses. Emotional pain is a pain unlike any other, and it is something that can often bring you to your knees. But what was God doing? With the benefit of hindsight and an ever-healing brain, I began to see that God was in the business of rescuing me. He was getting me to work, enough so that I could keep my job. He was getting me to the hospital, into the hands of those who could help. He was getting me to the therapist for help with the whys and the whats and the when. He was never leaving me when I cried out for help, in the form of my dog to hug, my home to be safe, the telephone to reach out, and my pen and my journal. What helped with mental illness? For me, as I lived with my mental illnesses, and as I spent time under professional guidance and support, we began to create what would become my basic tools for mental health, or what I now call my 3-legged stool of healing and support. First leg of the stool, talk therapy became extremely effective for me and a cornerstone of my healing, and still is today. Whether this is in the form of a one-on-one therapeutic relationship or in small groups where I healed because of the experiences and the care and concern of others, I began to learn about and then began the process of accepting my diagnoses and their respective paths to healing. Second leg of the stool, medication was and is effective for me. It's not true for everyone, and not everyone requires medication. But for me, it's a key part of my wellness. It did take a long time of trial and error in partnership with a skilled and caring psychiatrist to find that right combination. This was not an easy process for me, for my family, for my friends, as we moved from those early rocky months into later and more effective times of treatment. The final leg of my stool is that I have learned from others with mental illness how to build a life of my own that supports healing and recovery. For me, this includes scheduling time with others so that I don't isolate. And that means scheduling. That means taking the time myself to say, I need to put something into that calendar. I need music, I need laughter, I need my dog. I need to identify and watch for signs of relapse, and I'll talk more about that in a bit. Exercise and a healthy diet are recommended. I pretty much fall down in this area and could use some more support in doing that, but that is a definite plus for healing. Speaking to you is a form of recovery for me. I notice that when I start to feel a depression coming on, that my body and my psyche start to turn inward and down, and I don't look people in the face. So practicing with you is good for me. Continuing to learn about mental illness and mental health is also important for my recovery. That's my three-legged stool. Where was God in my recovery? He was the architect of that three-legged stool. I didn't invent it. I didn't even see it coming as I struggled with the daily work of being sick. He placed me in all the right spots over the years with the right people. Like a no-wake zone in a boat where you kind of throttle down to almost idle and you go through a channel and you feel a little bit of movement underneath you. That's what I felt during the years of healing, is that God was pushing and pulling and nudging me forward. And I could not have gone that direction without his guidance and help. Finally, for my story, what is happening now and what's next? As I speak and I go through additional counseling, I continue to learn more about what happened and what helps. I learn more about how illness affected my family and friends, and sometimes that's difficult to hear. Our family, my extended family, with its own individual experiences with mental illness, has learned a great deal, and much of it the hard way. My immediate family members had to relive negative family memories with me. They struggled with wanting both a quick fix and a permanent fix. 5 years with me was a long haul. At times they were tempted to take over and question my lack of progress as well as the quality of my professional help. But they also spent endless hours listening. They believed and hoped when I could not do either one, and they came to family therapy and never stopped praying. We come to now. My three-legged stool and each of the people behind it has kept me relapse-free for 6 years. I am leaning heavily on these tools right now as we have experienced some painful and difficult family issues over the past month. This illness has taught me a lot about myself, my vulnerabilities, and my strengths, and has taught me much about God, His steadfastness, His grace, and His forgiveness. I know that God will protect me should depression return and get right. I am equipped differently now, should that happen. I want to say a few words about the role of the local church for those with mental illness. I believe there is much the church has missed, but also much the church has done and has to offer for those with mental illness. As both a mental illness and a cancer survivor, I can say that the public response and support for cancer was much greater and much more open. And that is because we are used to talking about physical illness, and less so with mental illness. Mental illness can be very personal, and it is good to follow the lead of the individual in the ways we express care and concern. However, mental illness has long carried a stigma and is part of the reason I speak out and ask the church to be open and active in its support. I have a few ideas in that area that have come as a result of my speaking to churches and my experience with mental illness. First of all, God planned ahead for me 8 years before before I experienced mental illness by placing me in a small group. This small group, this Bible study group, started with the Purpose-Driven Life, a 6 to 8 week program, and ended up being a 16-year Bible study group. And what a gift that was to me. And small groups can be tremendous. Though the people in my small group prayed for me, listened to me, talked with me, gave me great advice, helped me pick myself up, and helped me know when I was headed the wrong direction. That is the accountability that a small group can give. Second, faith-based support groups can be tremendously helpful. I did not have a chance to be part of a faith-based mental illness support group. NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, has wonderful support groups for people with mental illness and for their family members and friends. But faith-based can be especially helpful because of the faith questions that come with mental illness, just as they do with physical illness. And so offering that would be another suggestion. Sermons, talks, educational programs help remove the stigma of mental illness and help bring the language of mental illness out into the open. Finally, supporting your pastors, as they are often the first stop for people who have questions about mental illness, and supporting them in their learning and training and in their own lives as they support and care for us with mental illness. Before we go into a time of questions, I wanted to take a little time to share some basic mental health information with you, including warning signs and helpful tips for you as you care for and love people with mental illness. Just a few pieces of information about how widespread mental illness can be. Depending on the source, 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 adults experience mental illness in a given year. 1 in 5 children, either currently or at some point during their childhood years, have had a serious mental disorder. 450 million people around the world live with mental illness. And NAMI lists 12 categories of mental illness, plus a category called related conditions, of which there are 6. So it is very widespread. In terms of cause of mental illness, genetics, your environment, and your lifestyle can influence whether you develop a mental health condition. It can have multiple and overlapping causes. How do you help someone with a mental illness? There are a large number of ways you can be of help. I point you to NAMI's website, where all of my resources come from. But that's a great place to start and a great place to call if you have questions. What helped me a great deal was my family and friends allowing time for recovery. As you heard, it was not a short trip through mental illness. It took steadfastness, it took patience, and it took a lot of love to support someone through recovery. Second, communicate regularly, honestly and kindly. Tell the person over and over that you care. And don't, if you can, judge the thoughts that the person is feeling. Oftentimes, these are thoughts we don't want to have either, and they are a surprise to us as well. Third, learn about your loved one's condition. Research, talk to others, find a support group, and understand, help understand. I had the gift of family members and friends coming with me to family therapy. And I will never forget that. That goes with me wherever I go, that they were showing their care and concern. And learn along with your loved one to recognize signs and early symptoms. For me, it's when I withdraw. And oftentimes, my family members and my friends will check in with me and say, haven't heard from you in a while. Are you okay? And that makes, for me, a lot of difference. Them just caring enough to understand those early warning signs sometimes helps push me back into therapy, back into the support that I need to continue my mental health. And finally, a few warning signs, and I say this with a caveat that because there are so many diagnoses, many of the warning signs are specific to each mental health condition. But there are some things you can watch for. Number one, notice if someone is feeling extremely sad, withdrawn, and for a long period of time, which doesn't sound like a long time, but can feel that way. It's more than a couple of weeks of extreme sadness and being withdrawn. Feeling out of control or risk-taking behaviors is another sign. Sudden, overwhelming fear for no reason, and that sometimes comes with physical symptoms such as a racing heart and a feeling of a heart attack, which happened to me multiple times. Severe mood swings that cause relationship problems, excess use of drugs and alcohol, and I wish I could say that was not a part of my journey, but as I cycled into depression, I self-medicated with alcohol, and that became a bit of a crutch for a while. And I have learned that, as they say, alcohol is a depressant, and it plays no useful role in mental health recovery. Drastic changes in behavior or sleeping habits. I often couldn't sleep, and that's one of my first warning signs, is when I have trouble sleeping. Extreme difficulty concentrating or learning, and finally confused thinking, which led often to me removing myself from work and going into treatment. So those are a few warning signs for you. Let's now move into a time of questions and thoughts from you. I want to first thank you for having this forum, for considering next steps for you and for Trinity, for caring for those with mental illness, and for being faithful to God's call. I thank you for all of that.
Sherri, your story is great. Great in that you're willing to share that with us. I think that mental health struggles they feel so personal and so interior. In other words, they're in our head, and the sort of distorted thinking sometimes. That's a sign for me if I'm thinking thoughts that are, continually negative, or someone's out to get me, or that kind of thing. And those things I think we all have from time to time. And I'm happy to say that I have healthy friends, and I often will check out my thoughts with them. But I think, especially this time of year, it's easy to be down.
Yep, this time of year, one of the things I've always struggled with is the winter time. And for a long time, I lived in California and then moved back to Minnesota. And I often wonder if that wasn't a factor in my mental illness and now mental health. I have to be extremely careful in the winter months. And that's oftentimes when I enhance my therapy and especially lean on those friends to help me notice.
Yeah, even the light therapy, I don't know if anyone's had that, but the light therapy I think is very helpful as well.
It can be very helpful. The lights are something that help simulate daylight, and I have a light at home and I have a light at work. And depending on the time of day, again, I'm not a good habit person, and so I don't take advantage of it on a regular daily basis like I should.
How many of you have been affected by mental health issues? Yeah. It is pervasive, and I think we often don't share that with other people. And I appreciate what you said about, we're more willing to talk about cancer and things that are physical and how we can help people than things that are internal going, well, I think they're a little off. Or I grew up with an uncle who was manic depressive, and I was like, get away from him. It was, I think especially so then, and I could not get far enough away. So that certainly wasn't the way to treat that at all.
Right, and many times mental illness, as I talked about earlier, there's a genetic component. And
Are you looking at me like, yeah, we can see that in you.
And for those of us that grew up a little while ago, there was not an understanding of that genetic component. And now I had genetic testing done for cancer. And I hope that we, as research improves and more is done, that we'll be able to help trace that, understand it, understand its roots. There's a lot that's still being learned about the brain and its role in mental illness, mental health, and I look forward to the day when much of that is much better known.
Yeah, I think anger is a part of it too. Sort of a continuing anger, and that something's wrong and that you're being mad, which can cover up, other things. It's a good cover.
It's a good cover. Anger, I have to remember, depression is anger turned inward, is often what is said. And I grew up, we have anger that runs pretty deep in our family. And I had a lot of trouble with that. It was my first go-to emotion. And as I went through, especially those weeks of outpatient therapy, I was often angry. And in the questions for God, I was often angry. And I learned a lot about how God doesn't shy away from our anger and accepts us as we are. And I don't always look back on that time without shame, but I have learned a great deal and am no longer the same. That's no longer my go-to emotion. That has really changed for me.
That's good, because shame is not helpful either. Do you guys have questions? Yeah, okay.
It's not so much a question, but I want to extend a thank you to you, and especially to your brother Mark. He saved me approximately 25 years ago when I was at the lowest of the low, and was thrust into a spotlight here at Trinity because there was a rumor mill about me attempting to take my life. And he helped me with that journey. At the time I was working with confirmation kids. So I had to confess and share my story publicly with teenagers. And Mark held my hand through the whole process. Came out stronger on the other side, put the rumors to bed, developed some strong friendships with the teenagers, because afterwards they came up to me and said, I've been there. That's how I'm feeling right now. And we had this bond where we watched out for each other. You know, I wasn't looked at as the crazy lady. I was at first, until I publicly stated what I did and what happened and why. But I thank God every day for your brother helping me to be who I am today. And I have a daughter that's going through mental health issues. You know, like you said, it's genetics. We looked at our family, and there's 4 generations on the same medication. Because it's all there. You know, my grandma who's 100, she takes her sad pills only when she's sad. You know, because she's of a different generation where you don't acknowledge mental health. But I like that we're talking about it, and instead of spreading rumors, talk to the person or their family about what's going on. Because I was very hurt by the rumors that were spread. And I shared that with the person that started the rumors and said, why didn't you come to the source? Don't talk about me behind my back. You know, I've been fighting it for 25 years. I am more than willing to share my story with anyone that wants to hear it. And that's part of the stigma of mental health. We need to be there to help each other and lift each other up. So please pass on to your brother. I'm still alive and kicking, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, and I will be praying for your daughter, because it is difficult, not only to have experienced yourself, but to watch someone else go through pain. So I will be praying. Thank you.
It is, and I think the people who try or do take their own life, that to me, and my mom tried to do it and failed, which she was very upset about. But she, I think she was just in another planet. I mean, it wasn't, you know, it almost is just beyond them. It's such, right, it's such an illness, and we, you know, having to see that a lot. So that's, you know, that's where it's really important to be there for other people and supportive, and instead of, you know, the other way about it. I did want to talk a little bit about Mark Holman, because I know Brian talked with him and was impressed with his ministry. They have a mental health ministry up at his church in Cross Lake.
That's right. It's called the Log Church. It's an evangelical free church in Cross Lake, and they decided to take a long look at community needs. And as they looked at those needs, they quickly discovered that mental health support was hard to find in Cross Lake, and that many people had to drive at least to Brainerd, if not further. And so they decided to take this on as a ministry of their church. And they now do support groups. I think they have 3 or 4 different support groups going. They do seminars every other month. They have opened up an office in the church for therapists, and they continue to look for what can be support. So those are ways that the church can really step in, depending on the needs of your area. Each ministry looks very different depending on the needs.
And also, like you mentioned, the small groups. We have a number of small groups and signups upstairs. I think those are really great for building relationships, and people have an opportunity then to sort of check in on each other as well. I mean, they're much more than just a study. It's about gaining a new circle of friends and ends up being confidants.
Absolutely. We had a group member who died of cancer. We had group member Mary. We had a group member move into assisted living. We went through every stage of life together, and just besides what I went through. And so it was absolutely fundamental to my well-being.
Sherri, it sounds like you benefited from talk therapy, counselor, therapists. There's oftentimes a stigma of people to go to a professional. And what would you say to those people? I mean, why has that been beneficial for you to go to someone like a counselor or therapist?
There's a lot of ways that therapy has been effective for me. And when I was, I don't want to give the impression that I just stepped into it easily. I went to my primary care doctor who recommended a therapist. And it took me a while to go because of the stigma, because of the fact that I thought I don't need that kind of help, which is often the thought that goes through your mind. And so I tried it out. I thought I'll try it once. It was one of the mornings that I was having a hard time getting off the couch, and I thought, well, maybe I should call. And I got an appointment for the next day, got up off the couch and went, and realized very quickly that that relationship that develops between yourself and a trained therapist who, first of all, understands your diagnosis and is trained specifically how to help with that diagnosis is what finally caught with me, is that this is a person who has experience with what I'm dealing with, who isn't afraid or runs away from what I'm dealing with, and can work alongside me to help with, it's often a disease of the mind as much in help. You need help adjusting that thinking many times, and a trained person will do that.
I do want to just thank you for talking about this so openly. I think there's such a stigma about the word mental illness or words. I think when people hear mental illness, they think of the bipolar, the schizophrenia. They don't think of anxiety and depression, because mental illness has such a negative connotation to it. Connie, I want to thank you for being so open. I think it affects so many more people than we realize, because you don't see it like you do cancer or a physical ailment. And so I work with a lot of patients with mental illness, but I'm a physical therapist, and that's just another diagnosis they may have that we have to work with. So I've learned a ton of things in the last years. And again, I think the more open we are, I think everybody knows it's out there, but no one wants to talk about it. No one wants to say, this has happened to me, this is what I'm feeling. I think if you know people and you recognize something is bothering them, maybe longer than normal, just be open with them. Just say, are you doing okay? Are you, don't put on that happy, we come to church and our lives are great. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. I think it's important to remember to reach out to people we know. I love Jerry's comment about the small groups. My husband and I did this small group book club, this last one they had, and we met a whole new group of people that we would have never met from Trinity without doing this group. And again, it's like a whole new circle of relationships. Lastly, you mentioned NAMI. And if anyone goes through the Orono Community Ed, NAMI's coming to Orono. They've gotten more involved. And they have two courses they're offering. They're free. One's in the end of January, one's in the beginning of February, about your own mental health, the effects of sleep, all of this kind of thing. So look in the catalog. And then in May, there's another one about supporting, like communities supporting mental health. So if you get the catalog from Orono Community Ed, look for that. Those are in there. And they're free. NAMI came last fall on a suicide awareness class, and so I think they're coming more often, which is nice to see.
It is nice to see. I kind of wish I wouldn't have said this as mental health, because sometimes that turns people away. And again, thank you for coming, because you are the brave ones. And sometimes these harder talks are the best ones for our program, and where you really get to learn more about people
find out how we can be helpful to each other. Any of us that have spoken are more than willing then to listen or maybe give, where we went for counseling or anything like that. And then Sherri brought some handouts that are on the counter. And NAMI is NAMI.org.
Right.
So in closing, the hope that we all have is our hope in the Lord, and that we can look toward the future with confidence and hope, and that we're here to support each other. It doesn't have to be a downward spiral. We can catch each other.
We can. And all of you who are here today, I really thank you for being here. Thanks, guys.